In this video, I'm going to share with you 11 indestructible aquarium plants in the hobby that you can buy. I'm going to be going over the essential info for each plant and what you need to know. Plant number 1 is going to be Jungle Val, aka Vallisneria. For me, this is one of the hardiest aquarium plants ever. I have kept these plants for about 2 years now. They're in all my tanks. Jungle Val is a great mid to background plant. You could put them together in groups. They're going to propagate and they will create this nice jungly look. Vallisneria usually grows better when you group them together. They do propagate super fast. You'll see runners near the roots all the time, and those things are going to spread and propagate the plant. And they grow pretty fast as soon as your Jungle Val settles in. They're going to grow super quickly. They're one of the fastest growing aquarium plants out there. Vallisneria does take a while to settle in when you first introduce them to the tank, but after that initial period, it's going to start growing very rapidly. So Jungle Val, fantastic beginner plant. You do want to have a deep substrate. They have extensive rooting systems that they rely on for finding nutrients, so deep substrate tanks are definitely helpful. This also means that Jungle Val is a heavy root feeder for the most part. They feed from the roots, and these plants are going to thrive in just about any aquarium. The next plant on this list is going to be Crypts. These are a very easy to keep beginner plant. They're another rooted plant. You see these used in aquariums all the time. There are many different varieties you can get. There's Crypt lucens, Crypt wendii, Crypt parvas. Crypt wendii will probably be the easiest. I've kept these in gravel aquariums with root tabs as fertilizers. They can also grow in sand. Doesn't really matter as long as there's a substrate so that they can root themselves. This is also another rooted plant. It grows really extensive roots. If you've ever pulled any of these out, you'll see that the root systems are just massive. But they're really easy to grow. It's not that hard. The one thing you do need to make sure is to keep the parameters stable because cryptocorynes are not used to large shifts in the tank. So try to not mess with the lighting or the water temperature. By that I mean once you've kept them in a certain point, don't try to change it all the time. You normally want to give them a slightly lower lighting. They do tend to grow better in low light. Cryptocorynes are also really easy to propagate. All you need to do is just split them near the crown, which is at the bottom of their stems. Just split it apart and plant them, and it's going to be able to grow from there. Third plant on this list is going to be Java moss. Java moss is a type of aquatic moss. You can grow on driftwood, rocks, even as a carpeting plant along the substrate. They're basically what they're called. They're really nice type of moss, not that hard to keep. You can just place them near the bottom or on a piece of driftwood or rock, and over time they're going to expand and grow over the thing that they're attached to. These are also really good if you have a breeding tank and you want the fry to have a place to hide. You do want to make sure that they get enough light. If they don't, then some of them will start to turn brown and die away. If you want Java moss to grow faster, you'll want to attach them to a surface, like along a piece of wood. I really like the way they look. I think Java moss is a really nice plant choice for beginners. Definitely one of the easiest aquarium plants. The fourth plant on this list is going to be Anubias. These are another bulletproof plant. Anubias are an epiphyte plant, meaning you can attach them to driftwood and stones. Anubias is very hardy. It grows very slowly, but it grows very stable. It doesn't really change a lot. And that's the good thing with slow growing plants. Usually if they don't really grow that fast, they don't die as fast either. So even if there is a mistake, you can spot it right away. Anubias is really easy to keep. You don't want to bury them in the substrate. What you want to do is place them near the substrate or attach them onto something like a rock. This plant also prefers slightly lower lighting, so if you have a light that's too bright, you might want to add some floating plants or some taller growing plants to make some shade. These guys rely on the water column for nutrients. They do fine without fertilizers. There's many different types of Anubias. There's Anubias nana petite, which are these super tiny Anubias, and there's also larger Anubias varieties. Anubias isn't a really fast growing plant, but they're really easy to keep. I've grown them without any nutrients. Like I said, they do grow best when you actually attach them to a surface. What that does is it provides a foundation for the roots to grow on. The other cool thing about Anubias is that their leaves are really hard to nibble on. They're very tough for fish to eat. And that means even fish like goldfish are not going to nibble on them. You also won't need to worry about snails grazing this plant. One thing I recommend is to buy a slightly larger piece of Anubias to start out with. Bigger Anubiases are usually a lot more stable when it comes to the growth, and they're not going to be affected as much by algae compared to if the plant was smaller. So Anubias, definitely a great beginner plant. Plant number 5 on the list is going to be red tiger lotus. This, I think, is a very underrated beginner plant. I don't see a lot of people keeping it. It's not as popular as some of the other ones on the list, but red tiger lotus is a really cool lotus plant. It's going to grow from a seed and eventually shoot up leaves that will go to the surface of the water. Kind of looks like lily pads from above. Super nice looking. This is definitely not the typical beginner plant you think of. Certainly don't hear this being mentioned a lot. You can see here with mine all the leaves that are reaching for the surface of the water. When you first start to grow these, you want to make sure to have enough nutrients inside the substrate, so I recommend adding a root tab or two near the seed to supply it through the initial stages of growth. I don't fertilize this one right here. I used to, but now it's doing pretty well on its own. It's even propagated recently and just formed a new plant, so now there's 2 in this tank. But red tiger lotus are really easy to care for. If they ever do need to be fertilized, throw a few root tabs in there, and your tiger lotus are going to be perfectly fine. Plant number 6 here is going to be Alodia. You've probably seen these in pet stores, so like your local Petco or PetSmart. These are very commonly sold. These were among the first aquarium plants I kept. They're a nice beginner stem plant. Alodia is very hardy. They can grow up to 2 inches a day if given the right conditions. Because of how crazy they grow, these plants are actually outlawed in some areas. They're a very bulletproof plant, great for beginners. They grow exactly like any other stem plant. You don't necessarily need to plant them in the substrate. They can grow floating. A great way to grow Alodia is to actually place them near the substrate but not quite in there. What you're trying to do is basically put them on top of the substrate and let the roots eventually come down and anchor itself and acquire nutrients from below. The 7th plant on this list is going to be guppy grass. Guppy grass, they literally grow like a weed. This plant is going to fill up your tank in no time. Guppy grass is really easy to propagate. You literally just cut it somewhere and move it somewhere else. There's nothing easier to propagate than guppy grass. Definitely one of the fastest growing plants and very indestructible. Guppy grass is another stem plant. This one is probably the only one that grows equally or even more crazier than Alodia. Guppy grass kind of grows all over the place. They don't have a certain way that they grow. They just grow every direction that they can. You'll see that some of their leaves are going to be darker than the others. The darker stems are going to be the older ones, and if you see them growing well, you're going to see new green shoots. You are going to have to trim guppy grass pretty often, especially if you want them to grow in a certain way. But these things are great if you're trying to breed an egg-laying fish or even shrimp, very useful for breeding tanks. I will say though that guppy grass is even easier to grow than Alodia. There's basically no requirements for this plant. All they need is water and a light. They're going to grow like crazy. Great plant if you're looking for something that will just cover up the whole tank. Guppy grass are also really great at soaking up ammonium nitrates, so it does a good job in keeping the water nice and clean. Plant number 8 is going to be hornwort. Hornwort is one of the first plants that I ever kept. They grow kind of like these needle-like pinecone leaves, and they just keep on growing. This is a really nice stem plant, one of the easiest to keep alive. Besides from growing from the main stem, they also shoot up side shoots. Those are going to keep growing as well, and they will grow all over the place. The hornwort that I had grew to cover the entire tank. Super bulletproof plant. Just make sure to not move them around too much because it's going to cause them to shed their leaves and make a huge mess. That's probably the only thing. Other than that, you could keep them in basically any tank. They do really good when they're floating, especially under brighter lighting. They normally grow the fastest when they're floating at the surface. Hornwort grows really fast in general. Plant number 9 is going to be duckweed. This is a super fast growing plant, also one of the most common. When you go into a fish room with a lot of tanks, usually you see duckweed being used in a lot of them. These are really good at taking out the excess ammonia. Duckweed spreads really fast, I'm sure it's no secret. All you need is a really small pinch of them, and they're going to cover the surface really quickly. I think these are a nice floating plant. They're great if you want to create some shade. Duckweed is basically unkillable. Once it starts growing fast, duckweed basically takes over your tank in no time. Sometimes it's even hard to get rid of these. They're going to survive in just about any water tank condition. These are the easiest floating plants you could find. Some people also like to use these as a food source for fish like African cichlids and goldfish. The only time they don't grow as fast is when there's some other type of floating plants in there, so maybe you got Salvinia, but when there's no other floating plants to compete, it's basically unstoppable. Plant number 10 is going to be pearlweed. This is one of the easiest carpeting plants you can find. I keep these in my 20-gallon. They're really easy to grow. All you have to do is plant them in. They don't really need any root tabs or any nutritional substrate, although it does help them a lot. They're really easy to look after. If you do provide great conditions, they're going to grow super fast like a weed. If you want to use them as a carpeting plant, one thing you could do is to trim these plants like at the middle. What it's going to do is it's going to cause the pearlweed to slowly start growing sideways instead of growing upwards, because that's how they normally grow. These plants for the most part take in nutrients from the water column, and they can also be kept floating, which is why I say substrate is not absolutely necessary. They're also great if you plant them in. You'll see the roots coming down, so they're really not hard to keep. Pearlweed is also a fantastic aquascaping plant. They really contribute a lot to the overall design of the tank, and you're going to see them used in a lot of simple low-tech scapes. They can grow very fast, which is what you hear a lot of people talking about, but I found that it only happens when the tank has medium to high lighting. I found that with the pearlweed that I've kept, If you keep the tank in a lower light, they're just going to sustain their growth and not change a lot. The 11th plant on this list is Java Fern. Java Fern is a fantastic beginner plant. It's super hardy and easy to keep. This is another rhizome plant just like the Anubias, but the way these plants grow is, instead of growing along the piece of driftwood like Anubias does, they grow these tiny Java Ferns on the leaves of the larger ones, and that's how they propagate. They can spread these tiny leaves really quickly. In fact, normally when you keep these plants, you'll see more of the tiny pieces than the actual large ones. And a lot of Java Ferns actually stay small. You can attach a whole bunch of these to the driftwood. They grow very slowly and you don't want to mess around with them all the time. If you ever get dying Java Fern, it's usually because of unstable parameters. It's going to do a lot better if you leave them alone. There's many different types of Java Ferns you could get. So there's the Windelov Java Ferns, which look really cool. They've got like these split tips. There's also the Trident Java Ferns. If you want Java Fern to grow taller, they do take a while to grow, as they are a very slow growing plant, but they will look great in your tank if you grow them well. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you found it useful, make sure to subscribe down below, and I'll see you guys in the next one.